My beloved friends, but there is a sacred mystery hidden in silence. A power so strong, so holy it cannot be explained in mere words. And yet tonight, I feel that same presence. The same gentle whisper that speaks when all the world is loud, when the chaos outside is raging and the soul finally chooses stillness. Be silent, oh, I know. We've been taught the opposite, haven't we? Push, speak louder, fight your way through. But I am here to tell you, from the depths of experience and the edge of the miraculous, that everything you're longing for is not found in the noise, not in the crowds, not in the applause. It is found in the stillness of your soul. There are miracles waiting in the silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of surrender. That holy hush where your fears are quieted, your striving stops, and your spirit begins to truly listen. Listen not with your ears, but with your heart. Oh, hear me, there is a divine orchestration taking place. You do not need to rush it. You do not need to beg for it. You do not even need to shout to be seen. There is an unseen hand moving on your behalf when you are silent. Silence is not weakness, it's divine strength. In a world that constantly equates power with noise and influence with volume, this truth seems almost hidden, tucked away like a rare gem beneath layers of distraction. Yet, when you strip away the clamor, the endless talking, the need to prove, the desire to be heard, you begin to realize that the most powerful souls are often the quietest. Silence is misunderstood. Many associate it with passivity, submission, or absence of power. But silence, true silence, the kind that is intentional and grounded, is a mighty force. It takes more strength to hold your peace than to argue your point. It takes more courage to listen deeply than to rush to be understood. It takes divine strength to trust that you don't need to announce every move, explain every choice, or justify your path to anyone. There is a holiness in silence. It is not empty. It is full, full of awareness, full of understanding, full of connection to something higher. It is in the silence that we begin to hear not just the noise of the world, but the whisper of eternity. The voice of wisdom does not scream. It doesn't compete. It waits for you to come to the quiet place where ego is silent and spirit is alive. People often rush to speak because they are afraid. Afraid of being overlooked, misunderstood, underestimated. But the one who knows who they are in God, the one who is anchored, doesn't need to shout. They carry authority in their stillness. When you walk in silence with your head high and your heart at peace, the atmosphere changes. You command respect without demanding it. You influence not by controlling others, but by mastering yourself. Divine strength isn't shown in how much you speak, but in how much you can carry without needing recognition. Some of the most anointed, most powerful individuals have learned the art of sacred restraint. They do not speak unless the words are necessary, and when they do speak, heaven listens. Their words are few, but they are full weight, full of conviction, full of life. There's a strength in the one who can walk away from conflict with grace. There's strength in the one who can be provoked and yet remain unmoved. There's strength in the soul that can endure judgment, criticism, misunderstanding, and still choose peace over proving. That is not weakness. That is not surrender to others. That is spiritual maturity. That is divine power. Even creation reflects this truth. The greatest wonders of nature, the star oceans, the mountains, they do not speak, yet they declare the glory of something higher. The sun rises without announcement. The tide moves without a sound. And yet their power cannot be denied. So too with you. You do not need to speak to prove your worth. You do not need to argue to show your wisdom. You do not need to shout to carry power. Silence allows you to hear what others miss. It makes room for discernment. It positions you for divine timing. The person who is always speaking, always reacting, always rushing to respond, they often miss what's really happening. But the silent one, the one who listens, they see deeper. They hear what isn't said. They sense the undercurrent. They move in step with heaven, not the pressure of people. It takes strength to be silent when you're misunderstood. It takes strength to be silent when you know the truth but aren't invited to speak it. It takes strength to be silent when the world wants noise, but your spirit craves depth. Stillness opens the door to clarity and direction. In a time when motion is mistaken for progress and constant activity is seen as purpose, stillness becomes a rare treasure. Yet within that quiet space, away from the noise, the urgency, and the pressure, something profound begins to unfold. The dust settles, the mind quiets, the heart begins to speak. And in that sacred stillness, the fog lifts, and we begin to see clearly what has always been waiting for us to notice. People often move through life in a hurry, rushing to make decisions, trying to keep up with expectations, chasing opportunities, and avoiding the discomfort of being still. But it is in stillness where wisdom lives. It is in stillness that confusion begins to unravel, and what once felt complicated suddenly becomes simple. Stillness isn't a pause in purpose. It is part of the purpose. It is the place where vision is birthed and direction becomes undeniable. Stillness is not laziness, nor is it avoidance. It is intentional. It is the moment when you choose not to be moved by pressure. You let go of the anxiety of having to figure everything out immediately. You surrender the illusion of control. You stop trying to force doors open and instead become still enough to hear the knock of the right one. It is in that posture that the way forward becomes clear, not because you demanded it, but because you became quiet enough to receive it. The world teaches that action brings results, and often that is true, but the wrong action, rushed, misaligned, fear-driven, can lead to delays, detours, and even damage. Stillness, on the other hand, gives space for alignment. It creates room for truth to rise above emotion. In stillness, we're able to distinguish between impulse and intuition, between fear and faith, between distraction and destiny. There is a rhythm in life, and stillness allows you to hear it. It's the space where you begin to walk in step with a deeper current, one that isn't dictated by noise, deadlines, or the opinions of others. There are things you cannot know while in motion. There are truths that cannot reach you until you stop. You must be still enough to hear the whisper of what truly matters. Direction is not found in chaos. Clarity does not dwell in anxiety. The soul was never designed to function under constant noise. You were created to commune, to listen, to discern. And that only happens when you learn to pause. Stillness is the invitation to reset, to recalibrate, to come back to your center. It is where you remember who you are. It is where you remember who God is. It is where the pieces begin to come together, not through striving, but through surrender. So many people are seeking answers but are too busy to receive them. They pray for guidance but rush away before the answer has time to arrive. They search for direction with a heart full of noise. But stillness is the answer to the searching. It is the quiet yes in a world full of loud no's. It is the deep breath after exhaustion. It is the open window where the light finally streams in. You don't need to know everything right now. You don't need to have all the steps. But if you will learn the discipline of stillness, if you will allow yourself to sit in the silence and wait with expectation instead of fear, you will begin to see the path that was hidden by your own movement. You will begin to sense the gentle guidance that was always there, waiting for you to slow down long enough to follow it. Faith is loudest when the voice is quiet. Not because it lacks conviction, not because it is timid, but because true faith does not need to announce itself. It stands calmly in the face of uncertainty. It does not scream to be recognized or beg to be understood. It simply whistles steady, unshaken, rooted in something deeper than emotion and more lasting than circumstances. In the silence of a surrendered heart, faith roars with a sound only heaven truly hears. There is a kind of strength in the soul that has learned to trust without needing constant reassurance. That kind of faith isn't loud in words. It is loud in posture. It shows up in how a person stands when everything around them is falling apart. It shows in the eyes of someone who refuses to give up, even when they don't say a word. Their silence is not empty. It is filled with belief, with expectation, with the quiet confidence that something greater is working behind the scenes. We live in a time where people are quick to voice doubt and slow to speak hope, quick to complain, slow to trust. But the one who has cultivated real faith doesn't need to argue with fear. They don't need to speak over anxiety. Their peace speaks for them, and that peace is often the loudest sound in the room, even when no words are spoken. Faith has a language, and it is not always spoken aloud. Sometimes it is found in the decision to wait with grace. Sometimes it is found in the refusal to retaliate. Sometimes it is seen in a tear that falls in the quiet place where no one else can see, followed by a choice to rise again anyway. Faith does not always shout. In fact, the most powerful expressions of faith are often the ones hidden from view. It takes more faith to wait in silence than to move in panic. It takes more faith to be still than to act just for the sake of action. The loudest voice of trust is not the one that tries to prove how much it believes, but the one that surrenders without resistance. Faith is not proven by how much you say you trust. It is proven by your posture when there are no answers, no signs, no visible path forward. The soul that has faith learns to walk without sight, and in doing so, discovers that the silence is not void, but full of divine presence. When you walk by faith, you begin to realize that you are not alone, even in the stillness. You become aware of the unseen hand guiding you, the invisible thread connecting you to your purpose. And that awareness gives you the ability to rest, even when everything around you demands anxiety. There are battles that are won in silence, not because they are ignored, but because faith refuses to be pulled into fear's game. When faith is loudest, it does not need to prove itself. It does not debate with doubt. It simply stands, holds its ground, and believes with a strength that cannot be shaken by noise. Faith has nothing to prove to the world. It has already seen what the world cannot. It knows that the unseen is more real than what is visible. It knows that promises whispered by God carry more weight than opinions shouted by people. And so it remains quiet, not out of weakness, but because it knows where its strength comes from. The quiet heart of faith does not seek attention. It seeks alignment. It does not crave the spotlight. It craves the presence. And when the voice is quiet, the spirit grows loud with assurance. Not because everything is certain, but because it knows who holds the uncertain. That is the faith that moves mountains, not with noise, but with stillness that shakes the heavens. Miracles are born in surrendered silence, not in chaos, not in shouting, not in striving to make something happen by force, but in that still, yielded space where the heart lets go, where the hands unclench, and where the soul bows low in quiet expectation. It is there, in that place of holy release, that heaven moves. The greatest breakthroughs often come not when we push harder, but when we surrender deeper. We are taught to hustle, to strive, to fix everything ourselves. And yet, miracle after miracle throughout history has been born not from man's effort but from man's surrender. When human strength ends, divine power begins. And that transition point, the moment when striving ends and trusting begins, is almost always wrapped in silence. It is not a silence of defeat but one of reverence. A silence that acknowledges, this is bigger than me. There is a kind of silence that is sacred. It is not the silence of apathy or fear but of faith. It says, I will not panic, I will not force, I will not manipulate, I will trust. That kind of silence prepares the way for the miraculous, because where there is no noise, no pride, no resistance, there is room for something higher to enter. Surrender is the language of miracles. Silence is the sound of surrender. When you stop trying to control the outcome, you begin to feel the peace that comes from knowing you were never meant to carry it all. Surrender is not passive. It is powerful. It is the act of laying down your weapons so heaven can fight for you. And when you lay them down in silence, in faith, you give God space to move without obstruction. So many answers are delayed not because they are denied, but because there is too much noise, too much striving, too much fear clouding the space where faith should live. In silence, there is listening. In surrender, there is alignment. And in that alignment, miracles find their place. They are not forced in, they flow in. Like light into a dark room, like peace into anxiety. They arrive when the atmosphere is right. That atmosphere is created in the quietness of heart that has let go of needing to understand and has chosen instead to believe. Miracles are not born in the chaos of doubt. They are born in the stillness of belief. When the heart is quiet, it can hear the whisper of destiny. When the spirit is at rest, it can recognize the move of the divine. In that surrendered silence, your posture says more than words ever could. I trust you. Even when I don't see, even when I don't feel, even when everything in me wants to fix it, solve it, explain it. I choose to be still. That choice becomes the doorway through which the impossible walks in. Many people miss their miracle not because it wasn't coming, but because they filled the silence with fear. They spoke doubt over what needed faith. They tried to rush what required patience. But the ones who see miracles are often the ones who learn how to wait quietly. They know how to sit in the silence without losing their hope. They know how to worship without needing a reason. They know how to believe when there's nothing visible to believe in. That is the kind of surrendered silence that births the miraculous. Miracles are not earned. They are received, and receiving requires open hands, not clenched fists. A surrendered heart, not a controlling mind. And the most beautiful miracles often arrive in moments when no one is watching, no one is speaking, and no one is trying. Just a soul quietly surrendered, completely open, fully trusting. That is the moment heaven touches earth. Silence speaks louder than reaction. In the moments when emotions surge and the urge to respond feels overwhelming, silence becomes a weapon of wisdom. It is not silence out of fear or avoidance, but the kind that carries authority, composure, and control. When you choose not to react, you shift the atmosphere. You reclaim your power. You speak volumes without saying a single word, because silence, when rooted in confidence and clarity, has a sound that echoes far beyond noise. The world is trained to react. When something offends, people respond. When something provokes, they strike back. Social media, conversations, even relationships have become battlegrounds of constant reaction. But reaction is often a product of impulse, not intention. It's the overflow of a restless spirit trying to defend itself. True power is not in reacting, it's in restraining. And silence is not weakness in those moments. It is the sign of one who has nothing to prove, nothing to defend, and everything to preserve. To remain silent when you could argue is to declare, without speaking, that your peace is more valuable than your pride. It says, I am not here to win battles that don't build me. It says, "My energy is sacred, and I choose not to waste it on things that are beneath my purpose." That kind of silence leaves a lasting impression. It causes people to wonder. It creates space for truth to rise without interference. And most importantly, it leaves room for a greater voice. God's voice, to speak on your behalf. There is a difference between being quiet and being silenced. Being silenced means you were forced into silence, but being quiet by choice is an act of strength. It is a spiritual decision to pause before you respond, to breathe before you speak, to trust before you defend. That stillness does not go unnoticed. It speaks to the maturity of a person who is not tossed by every wind, not triggered by every insult, not baited into every argument. When you respond out of reaction, you lower yourself to the level of the noise. But when you remain silent, you rise above it. And from that higher place, you see clearly. You see the motives of others. You see the traps set before you. You see the bigger picture. Silence gives you vision. Reaction clouds it. Silence allows wisdom to speak from within, while reaction often speaks from fear, insecurity, or anger. People often underestimate the impact of unspoken restraint. They think the loudest voice wins the argument. But in truth, the one who remains composed, who does not flinch, who does not fight with the same weapons thrown at them, that person wins something greater than the argument. They win dignity. They win strength. They win alignment with something far more powerful than human approval. There are battles you only win by choosing not to fight. And there are moments when your silence becomes the loudest sound in the room, not because it avoids the truth, but because it honors it. Some truths are so sacred they do not need to be shouted. They do not need to be defended. They stand on their own, and silence becomes their guardian. It becomes the space in which truth reveals itself, untouched by emotion, unhindered by human interference. Choosing not to react is not about becoming indifferent. It is about becoming wise. It is knowing the cost of every word, the weight of every response. It is understanding that every time you choose silence over reaction, you step into a higher realm of authority. You operate from a place of discernment rather than ego. You align yourself not with what is loud, but with what is lasting. In that silence, your spirit speaks. It says you are not shaken. It says you are anchored. It says you are listening to a voice that does not speak in chaos, but in stillness. And in that stillness, you become unmovable. Not because you've said everything right, but because you knew when to say nothing at all. Elevation comes when you stop defending yourself. There is a level of growth, a place of power, that cannot be reached until you release the need to prove your worth, your purity, your intentions, or your direction. As long as you keep explaining yourself to everyone who doubts you, you remain tied to their understanding, their approval, their permission. But when you stop defending yourself, when you trust that time, truth, and divine justice will speak louder than your voice ever could, you step into a higher dimension of freedom and authority. The need to defend is often born out of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, misrepresented, or wrongly judged. But every time you defend yourself out of fear, you surrender your peace to someone else's opinion. You hand over your focus to voices that were never meant to guide you. Elevation demands that you release that fear. It requires that you stop trying to control how others see you, and instead focus on how heaven sees you. When you know who you are, you no longer feel compelled to convince others. Defending yourself keeps you circling battles that are beneath your calling. There's a weight that lifts when you realize not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every whisper deserves your attention. Not every assumption deserves your energy. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent and let your consistency speak. Let your character speak. Let the fruit of your life speak. Time has a way of revealing what words cannot. When you stop defending yourself, you make room for God to step in. You take your hands off the situation and allow divine justice to work in ways far beyond what your explanations could accomplish. Your silence becomes an act of faith, a declaration that you trust a higher court, a greater wisdom, and a bigger picture. It is not passivity, it is positioning. It is the posture of one who knows that vindication is not always immediate, but it is always inevitable when your heart remains pure. Defensiveness is often misunderstood as strength, but it is actually a form of bondage. It ties you to the judgments of others. It keeps your energy wrapped up in opinions and perceptions. But when you lay down the need to explain yourself, you pick up something far greater in peace. And from that peace comes clarity, direction, and elevation. You begin to rise, not because you forced it, but because you made room for it. There are people who will misunderstand you no matter how well you explain. There are voices that will twist your words, no matter how carefully you choose them. And there are moments when the more you try to defend yourself, the more entangled you become in a web of unnecessary conflict. But when you rise above the need to be right in their eyes, you begin to see clearly. You begin to move freely. You begin to walk in alignment with a purpose that doesn't require validation. Elevation is not just about moving higher. It's about moving lighter. And nothing weighs heavier on the soul than the constant burden of defending yourself. The moment you release that burden, you begin to soar. You begin to experience the strength that comes from inner stillness, not outer noise. You learn to walk through false accusations with grace. You learn to carry silence like a shield. You learn that truth is not always defended in the moment. It is often revealed in the outcome. The more you grow, the less you explain. The more aligned you become, the more misunderstood you may be. But that misunderstanding is not a prison. It is a path that leads away from the noise of opinion and toward the clarity of purpose. You cannot be elevated and entangled at the same time. To rise, you must release. Release the need to be understood. Release the pressure to prove. Release the habit of defending what time and truth will one day reveal. Peace thrives where noise ends, not just the noise around you, but the noise within you. The endless dialogue of doubt, the murmurs of anxiety, the inner debates that echo long after the world has gone quiet. Real peace is not found in a perfect environment, but in a disciplined stillness of spirit. It is the quiet that doesn't wait for life to calm down, but instead chooses to be calm in the midst of life. That kind of peace is not a result of external circumstances. It is born in the sacred chamber of silence. There is a reason why peace eludes those who chase it through control. Trying to silence life's cause through manipulation only creates more unrest. But when you turn inward, when you slow the rhythm of your racing thoughts and learn to sit in the present moment without fear of what's next, peace begins to bloom. It doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It slips in gently like a whisper in the places where noise is no longer welcome. Noise is not only loud, it's constant. It's the compulsion to always be doing, always be achieving, always be connected. It's the pressure to respond quickly, to stay updated, to maintain a certain image. That kind of noise keeps the soul exhausted. It leaves no room for restoration. It drowns out the voice of wisdom, the promptings of the spirit, the guidance that comes not through frenzy but through focus. Peace, on the other hand, does not shout to be heard. It is waiting in the background. Present the moment you choose silence. Peace requires courage. It takes boldness to stop scrolling, to stop replying, to stop arguing, to stop explaining. It takes strength to unplug, to step back, to go inward when everything around you demands outward action. But that is where true transformation begins. Not in the noise, but in the quietness where you hear yourself again. And more than yourself, you begin to hear what's eternal, what's unshakable, what has always been there, just beneath the chaos. You can learn to live with peace as your anchor, not as a reward for things going right, but as a choice regardless of what goes wrong. When you learn that peace is not passive but powerful, not the absence of conflict but the presence of clarity, you stop waiting for circumstances to settle and settling yourself. You stop waiting for apologies, outcomes, and confirmations, and instead decide that peace is a place you will dwell in by choice, not by chance. So many people are restless because they've made peace conditional. Conditional on people understanding them, on goals being met, on dreams being fulfilled. But unconditional peace comes when you quiet the need for everything to align and simply align yourself internally. When your spirit is quiet, your discernment sharpens. You start to see what matters and what doesn't. You begin to recognize distractions for what they are. You move slower but with more purpose. You speak less, but with more power. In silence, peace is no longer something you pursue. It's something you become. It becomes your resting posture, your automatic response, your grounding place in the middle of chaos. Peace is not a mood, not a fleeting emotional high. It is a spiritual residence, and you build it brick by brick in the quiet places. You protect it fiercely, not by avoiding trouble, but by choosing not to let trouble live in you. When peace becomes your normal, noise becomes foreign. You stop tolerating it in your relationships, your mind, your space. You begin to crave stillness, not out of laziness, but out of reverence. Reverence for the power of calm, for the clarity of quiet, for the presence that meets you when you stop striving and start listening. Peace is always available. It is never absent, only overshadowed. And when the noise ends, what's been waiting all along finally has room to rise. When you learn to be still, life begins to speak. Not in the language of noise, but in the quiet, subtle movements of truth. Stillness is not inactivity, it is attentiveness. It is the discipline of tuning your ear to a higher frequency where wisdom resides and clarity begins to unfold. In a world obsessed with motion, stillness becomes a revolutionary act. It is the art of stopping long enough to recognize what has been speaking to you all along, the voice that gets lost beneath the rush, buried under the pressure to perform, achieve, and respond. Stillness is where discernment sharpens. It is in the silence of stillness that you recognize what is real and what is illusion. Noise confuses, but stillness reveals. So often we make decisions too fast, speak too quickly, move too soon. But when you pause, when you resist the urge to react and allow yourself to sit quietly in the moment, answers emerge without force. You no longer need to beg for direction, because direction flows naturally when the heart is calm. You no longer need to search for signs, because they are already present, awaiting for the noise to subside so they can be seen. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it's the presence of awareness. In the still places, your spirit becomes alert. You begin to notice what you've missed, to feel what you've been numbing, to hear what you've been drowning out. It is in stillness that healing begins, because the truth finally has space to rise without resistance. The pain that's been buried finds air. The dreams that have been silenced begin to whisper again. Stillness makes room for realignment. It is not comfortable, but it is necessary. In stillness, time stretches. You are no longer rushing ahead, trying to catch up with someone else's pace. You are no longer haunted by the past or gripped by the anxiety of the future. You begin to live in the now, not as a cliche but as a sacred practice. The now becomes holy, the breath becomes enough, the moment becomes full. And in that fullness, life begins to unfold, not rushed, not manipulated, but revealed step by step, moment by moment, breath by breath. So many people are afraid of stillness because they have confused it with stagnation. But stillness is not stagnation, it is alignment. It is the quiet preparation that precedes the right movement. It is the deep breath before the breakthrough. It is the pause that holds the power of precision. When you are still, you are not doing nothing. You are making space for everything essential. You are allowing wisdom to settle. You are allowing peace to lead. You are allowing purpose to breathe. Stillness teaches patience. It teaches restraint. It teaches you that you do not have to chase everything that flashes before your eyes. It teaches you to wait, not passively, but attentively. Waiting with stillness is an act of faith. It says, I trust the timing of my life. It says, I do not need to force what is meant for me. It says, I am rooted enough to endure the quiet before the rain. This kind of stillness is not taught in noise. It is cultivated in the sacred space of silence, where the soul learns to listen before it speaks and receive before it reaches. When you become still, you stop measuring your worth by how much you do and begin to recognize your value in who you are. You become grounded. You stop living in reaction and start living in intention. You start to see that life is not about always moving forward. It's about knowing when to stop, when to breathe, when to simply be. And in that being, everything begins to unfold. Not through force, not through frenzy, but through the gentle unfolding that only stillness can bring. When the noise fades, when the striving ends, when the need to defend, react, and prove yourself dissolves into silence, you find what you were truly looking for. Not in applause, not in the approval of others, but in the still, sacred place within. In silence, you hear the voice that matters. In restraint, you uncover true strength. In stillness, life begins to move for you, not against you. This is not the silence of weakness. It is the silence of mastery, of clarity, of unshakable purpose. Be silent, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to say everything. Be silent and you will get everything in life. Not all at once, not always in the way you expected, but always in the way that aligns with your deepest truth.